What's going on, everybody? Brett here with my YouTube channel Good Talk Gaming. We're back playing some more 2v2s. This is going to be another one of the auto-generated armies. I went over in the last video kind of the differences between my version of auto-generated and perhaps a lot of the other people you may see on YouTube, and I'll get into that as the battle starts. I'm going to be playing as the vampire counts. My ally is going to be the dark elves, and we're going to be fighting against the greenskins and the high elves. The map is going to be Prague, and it's a pretty open map. Let's go ahead and slow-mo it. I'm the vampire counts. I don't have any range. My ally is the dark elves, and for ranged, all he was able to get were the bolt fiends and the dark shards. So we kind of know right away, hey, we need to be the ones advancing. So in terms of auto-generated, for those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, you basically get into a game, you hit the auto-generate button, and the computer picks an army for you. But what often ends up happening, especially if you're playing as the vampire accounts, for goodness sake, the computer will take every single spell. And you'll see here I still have quite a few spells and abilities, but they'll take all of them. And if you get like a necromancer as well as another hero, you could end up spending an extra 1,000 gold on stuff that you really don't need. So what I like to do instead is to make it so that you can remove chevrons, which sometimes are a bit too extra. You can end up losing hundreds of gold in just chevrons that the computer thinks are good, and also remove and change around spells. So because of that, I was able to get more units. I think I ended up picking up the crypt horrors for fun and for flavor with that extra bit of gold. We can go ahead and take a look at these guys. The faces only a mother could love. Don't look at their crotches, it's pretty weird. I would recommend not doing that. So my army is going to be made up on the ground of a good mix of skeletons and graveguard. So graveguard kind of to hold down the center. Some great weapons out on the flanks and some spearmen out on the other flanks. The crypt horrors, you definitely need to mix them in and amongst infantry to get the most value from them. I also have a corpse cart with the unholy lodestone to apply that regen bonus, as well as I think it gives melee attack and melee defense +5 and an aura around them. So that'll be good in any kind of mosh pit style battle. I have my White King here, who is mounted, and he's hanging out with the Black Knights. These are the standard Black Knights. They're anti-infantry. They're pretty cheap, but that doesn't mean that I want them to get crushed at the beginning of the battle. And I figured against the High Elves especially that the game might random them some Dragon Knights or something like Dragon Princes rather, or the Fireborn, something like that, and then they would just get dumpstered. So I'm going to hold them in that tiny little tree pocket to keep them invisible so that my opponents do not know about them until the time comes that I can engage them in a more favorable way. Now, I almost need to pause this because we're all kind of rushing at each other right now. What is the real strength of my build is definitely my Air Force. I've divided it up into two. I have one here, one single Fellbat unit, and the Terrorgeist. So the Terrorgeist is a great anti-large unit, great armor piercing, and slow-mo it just so you can get the full effect of these guys. But in conjunction with just one cheap unit of Fellbats, you can get a ton of value from them. The Fellbats tank while the Terrorgeist does the damage. And then over here I also have two groups of Fellbats with one group of Vargeists. So the Vargeists are much better versus infantry. They do have frenzy. They have really high weapon strength. We can take a look at it. It's 107, so it's huge. They absolutely dumpster infantry. You want to almost use them as if they are flying cavalry, monstrous cavalry. Try and charge from the back if you can. It's not always easy to do. But especially if your opponent has the kind of range that our opponent does here, the Dark Elf player and I end up mostly collapsing onto the Greenskin player, who seemed to be very skillful. He had a pretty solid build. Night Goblins and Orc Boys here in the front, some Savage Orcs here making up part of his front line. His Black Orcs being held slightly, behind the front line to not take all that damage. He kept his chevrons, which is an interesting choice. Not a bad choice. Black Orcs with chevrons are quite tanky. Also some Savage Orc Biggins here in the background. They're dual wielding their choppas, and they're going to be excellent anti-infantry mulchers for the Greenskin player. And then the Night Goblin Archers applying that poison from range. They're going to do quite the number against my Fellbats, but if I can shut them down, I can really reduce the efficiency of this entire army. And then out here on the flank, he has a pretty large mobile contingent, which is getting into skirmishing with the Dark Elf player. He has two groups of Dark Riders with repeater crossbows, so I think they can fire while moving. but they can only fire directly in front of them, I do believe. Um, that may be incorrect. No, they have Vanguard deployment, but they can't fire while moving. But if they stand still and shoot, they're still fast enough to be able to kite just about anything. But the Goblin Wolf Riders here are even faster. Oh no, they're the exact same speed. They're the exact same speed. But if they can get in and amongst them, especially if they're hitting them from behind, they're going to be able to do quite a bit of damage. Tie them down. The Durkit Squigs, these dudes are great at dealing with infantry. You can see here they're taking some fire. The Orc Boar Boy Biggins, one of the greatest tongue twisters in the game. These guys can take out other forms of cavalry. And we'll see here that the Pharaoh Manticore and the Supreme Sorceress, this is why I kind of need to pause it. This game gets underway quickly. They see kind of a free pick here on the Savage Orcs, and they're going to go for it. The Phantom Manticore, despite the fact that it can rampage in this type of combat, it does cause fear and terror. So the Savage Orcs, not known for their amazing leadership, are going to have a tough time dealing with the Manticore. And the Supreme Sorceress, with some of her spells cut, is a very cheap option. Spirit Leech, Fate Abuna, pretty standard stuff. And then how do you say this? Arnzapal's Black Horror. It basically looks like a giant tarantula. It's pretty awesome looking spell. And we're going to get that going off later in the game, I guarantee it. And then they also have Chariots out here being harassed by the Dark Riders with shields and some standard squig herds. So he has them pretty well enveloped. His little, cavalry contingent is being harassed and picked apart here while his front line advances. Harganeth Executioners, heavy metal guys, excellent great sword style unit, good armor piercing. Also mixed in are going to be the Black Ark Corsairs, very good anti-infantry, very good against the Greenskins. They have enough armor to stand and fight versus Orc, especially Orc just standard boys. And against Night Goblins, who don't have the best armor piercing or armor themselves, they'll absolutely chew through them. They have a bit of physical resistance as well. It's only 6%, but that's because they are standing next to the Death Hag on the altar of Cain. So she has a ton of abilities. It would take a long time to go over them all. But she has Murderous Mastery. She causes terror. She has missile resistance, magic resistance, physical resistance. She has an encouragement aura. She's immune to psychology. The Blood Shield of Cain is what's giving that physical resistance in an AoE. She, of course, has Frenzy, because why wouldn't she? She's basically like drinking in blood. Take a look at that thing. It's kind of a ridiculous looking unit, but it's pretty cool when you watch it go. The Fury of Cain, which is an augment, causes it to rampage but increases its stats. Foe Seeker, as well as Witch's Brew, which does kind of the same thing, also causes rampage style effects. So they're going to absolutely run over this army here with a little bit of Dark Shard backup and some Bleak Swords out on the flanks. So I'm sure you guys have noticed I hovered over them for a second, but I also have the Feasters in the Dusk here, the Regiment of Renowned Crypt Ghouls, and they're hiding in deep vanguard. I was hoping to get in amongst maybe some Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers, some Archers, something like that. And I'm going to be moving them forward pretty quickly. They're hidden behind the hill. And the Greenskin Lord is going to be the Goblin Great Shaman on a Wolf, which is a choice I think is pretty competitive. They're very cheap if you just cut down on some of the spells. He has the Wa, of course, which is going to be very powerful if he and his ally chooses to charge at the same time. He has the Vindictive Glare, which is seeing a lot of play right now in the meta. Very good at sniping out large targets. Also Curse of the Bad Moon, which is great versus clumped up infantry. And it's a situation you can pretty easily make yourself if you're very aware of it from the beginning of the game. Itchy Nuisance can affect a whole front line, basically, a whole pit fight, and really turn it your way for only 8 mana. It's a great ability. And every time he casts, he's going to be applying that Sneaky Stealing debuff to our casters, which is going to make it hard for my Lord, which I didn't even go over, but he is definitely going to be a powerhouse in this battle. The guy, Heinrich Himmler himself. I also, of course, have Krell. So I'm going to be summoning Krell. I tend to hold on to him until I see a great opportunity to use him. I don't drop him instantly. I want to drop him in a place where I know I'm going to be using Invocations of Nehek, because he does degenerate over time. And if he's degenerating, the best way to counter that is with healing. And if you can drop him in the back of an armored infantry fight, he'll do great there. If you drop him in a one-on-one versus an enemy lord, he'll do great there, but you got to be able to support him with healing. I also took a Wind of Death, very expensive spell. I probably could have got like 2 groups of zombies or something for that. But I'm looking to make good use of it. In a 2v2, a lot of times you could find great opportunities for Winds of Death. Invocation of the Heck, Raise Deads, of course, and I also took the Chaos Tomb Blade. So whenever I'm engaged in melee, I will be regening the health of the units around me. And it also gives me +5 melee attack. So it's not a bad item for him. And then also, of course, when I cast, I regen HP. So I'm going to be getting a lot of HP regen this battle. Okay, and then last but not least, I know it's a long intro, guys, pardon me, but there's a lot of units on the field, is going to be the High Elf player. So the High Elf player was able to get a Sun Dragon. I think this is the lowest, yeah, this is the lowest tier dragon, but at the end of the day, it's still a dragon. Their flaming melee attacks are going to be very effective versus the vampire counts. They also, of course, have their breath attack, which can destroy blobbed up infantry. Very good against blobbed up vampire counts units. The Great Eagle, pretty mobile threat. If I was the High Elf player, I would definitely be looking to either use it in conjunction with the Sun Dragon as kind of a way to increase its DPS, kind of augment its damage in any particular fight, or to get in and around, perhaps bring it over here to help support the Greenskin player chase off some of this cavalry. A Great Eagle would be very effective against some pretty weak Dark Rider units. The front line here is going to be Swordmasters of Hoeth, and regular Spearmen, so not much of a front line, honestly. Might have been better to deploy with the Greenskin player so that they could make use of his very wide front line, augment it with some stronger High Elf troops, and then take advantage of the ranged assets which they were given. The Lord and Sea Guard with shields are basically another melee unit. The game kind of gave them a ton of cavalry. Seems to be the biggest thing they were able to get. Silver Helms, 2 groups with shields, lots of chevrons. There's Illyrian Reaver Archers. Very great unit. These guys can fire while moving. I think they have a 360 fire as well. I don't quite remember. I think they do. I think they can fire on a 360. I'm not 100% sure on that. But being able to fire while moving and having a movement speed of 90 is a pretty brutal thing. He also has a Lithanar who will be doing damage from range for nearly the entire battle. Look how gigantic he is compared to the other elves. But with his awesome bow, he's got Slippery. I'm pretty sure he has his Moon Bow, which is kind of a laser beam style effect, which will decimate anything it hits. And then we also have the High Mage, who took probably way too many spells. Kind of hard to click on her because she's standing in amongst the Silver Helms here. But we can look at her spells. Apotheosis for healing. The Shield of Sapphire to give damage resistance map wide, which is a very powerful effect. 11% every time she casts. So if you're just steadily casting this 5 mana, very cheap healing spell, you're going to be giving that damage resistant buff to your entire army, your allies' army. Reload skill on Hand of Glory. I mean, I could see that being useful if you have a lot of ranged. Soul Quench. Tempest for flying units, which could be very good against us if used correctly. Arcane and Forging, very good against a single opponent. Very good against Heinrich Kimmler, who is a caster. So lots of great spells here. Also Fiery Convocation. So Fiery Convocation goes down the line. It's like a phoenix that flies down the line and burns everything in a straight line. Would be very powerful against my grouped up units. The High, man, I've never really even thought about it before, but the High Mage for the High Elves has pretty much everything you need to help counter a Vampire Count's army. So without any further ado, guys, let's get into it. That was quite the long introduction. I hope you don't mind. But the Dark Elf player is going to be getting right in there. The Death Hag is going to be just absolutely mowing through the Night Goblins. They have no mass to stop her, and in a moment I'm sure they'll rout her. I'm going to be using my Fellbats and my Vargeist to shut down different targets. So I see, at this point, I can see the archers, and I'm going to be moving them in to separate, shut down the ranged firepower that's there. And we're collapsing. I'm going to be sending in the Crypt Horrors against the Black Orcs. It's kind of a target that they're very good against. They have armor piercing and regen, and the Black Orcs need to get hit hard or else they just don't die. And with the rest of my units, I'm going to be forming a bit of a flank denial. My Black Knights and my White Kings, when I realize that these are not Dragon Princes, these are just Silver Helms, I send in my Black Knights and my White King to go ahead and fight them. And they're going to do okay in that type of battle. The Unholy Lodestone is going to be getting in here to apply that regen effect and to make sure that I'm also getting those buffs in melee. And when I said I'm getting a bit of a flank denial, what I mean is I'm helping my ally to overwhelm the Greenskin player, of which they're doing a pretty good job by themselves. But I'm using 2 of my units in reserve to make it so that I can't be flanked by the Swordmasters of Hoeth, the Spearmen, the other Swordmasters. And right now he chose to go in on my Graveguard with great weapons, and I said, okay, let's take that fight. We'll throw in the Terrorgeist and this group of Fellbats here who are absorbing a lot of fire. And they're going to go in on the Great Eagle, try and shut them down. But you see here, they're kind of wrapping me up. The White King was starting to do some damage. The Black Knights were kind of losing that fight 2v1. Crypt-Horrors, slow-mo this. You don't get to see Crypt-Horrors battling Black Orcs every day. But this is a pretty good matchup for them, and with the support of the Bleak Swords and the Dark Arc Corsairs, they're going to be doing pretty well in this melee combat. But the Black Orcs are beastly units. They're already up to 30 kills. It's kind of insane. But I've managed to get in there, guys. The Feasters in the Dust, these little skeevy, creepy looking guys, they're going to be getting in and trying to shut down the Lothern Sea Guard if I can. So also we have these Goblin Wolf Riders here who are attempting to chase down these Dark Riders, but are just ultimately failing. The Durkis Squig Hoppers getting in there and shutting down the Bolt Throwers, or the Bolt Fiends, as I think is what they're called. And they're just gone. There's only 19 of them left. They still have full ammo, so they were shut down relatively quickly. And these Dark Shards as well are still engaged and getting shut down, so lots of value. 84 kills already. That's absolutely insane. This Manticore and the Sorceress were able to do good work versus those Savage Orcs. And as I mentioned, I used my Fellbats. I shut down the Archers. You'll see there, they're running. My Vargeist got in pretty heavy on those Doom Diver Catapults and sent them running. And then my other Fellbats were on these Night Goblin Archers. But good play here from the Greenskin player. He pulled his Archers over to the Goblins, the cheap Goblins with spears, and they're going to be able to actually fight the Fellbats off, whereas the Archers would not be able to do that. Harkonnen Executioner is going to take a lot of units off the battlefield, but a very late wah being popped from the Greenskin player. It's going to really push the stats of the High Elf units into the stratosphere in terms of melee attack. It's going to make them very effective. But my Features in the Dust were doing very well against these Lothern Sea Guard, but with these different buffs with the wah, they're going to have a much harder time. And that fight that I was looking to engage on, all of a sudden like, nah, no thank you. And I'm going to get up in here with these Fellbats, my Terrorgeist. I'm getting some healing off from Heinrich Himmler, and there we go. There's going to be an Invocation of the Heck upgraded to keep especially my Terrorgeist fighting. And we need to take them down. We need to focus one of them and try and kill them if we can. The Black Knights at this point are just kind of tying down this cavalry while the Feasters attempt to burst down Elithanar. And they're going to be able to do that with their poison. They're at very least tying him into melee combat so he can't shoot us with that bow. The Greenskin player is being forced to try and pull together what remains of his army. He's got some skirmisher units he can use. I'm bringing in my heavy hitters to kind of fight with my Grave Guard, who I kept in reserve. I also had the Great Weapon variant, who are going to do much better versus the Swordmasters of Hoeth in the standard variant. They do have anti-infantry bonuses. And now Krell is in the battle. And Krell in the midst of all these units. I also summoned some zombies to tie them in here, but also to give some damage absorption for Krell. And now that my units are all kind of blobbed up in the air above and on the ground below, this is a prime spot for an upgraded Invocation of the Heck to really keep my units topped off. The Death Hag is coming over. The Black Orcs are... not the Black Orcs. The Orc Boarboy Biggins, the most tongue twistery thing ever, are getting Fate Up Unit, and that's going to drive them off the battlefield. They were actually pretty healthy before that happened. The Goblin Big Boss here is fighting my Skeleton Spearman, which is not a good fight for him. They are anti-large, and he is mounted. Lots of routing Dark Elf units have returned to combat. My Terrorgeist is going to be chasing off the Sun Dragon. I would much prefer to use Fellbats to do that, but a lot of my Fellbats at this point are pretty much gone. These ones are tying down the Great Eagle, and at this point, Elithanar is getting Spirit Leech, so good play from my opponent there. The High Mage. Oh lord. I think it was about at this point that I get off a pretty brutal spell, and so does my ally. You see here the Supreme Sorceress is coming in. Yeah, here we go. We do this at almost the exact same time, which is kind of crazy. But I realized, you know what, I haven't used a Wind of Death, and there it goes. There were probably some better chances to do that. Here goes this crazy bounce spell off the Sorceress, and it's going to do a lot of damage as well. And they're going to tear into probably the best units left on the battlefield for these guys, these Lothern Sea Guard and Illyrian Reavers. Ultimately could have kited us, done a lot of ranged work against us. But the infantry fight has crumbled. The Lore Masters, the Sword Masters I should say, are gone. The Spearmen are routing. Elithanar got surrounded and beaten down. And whew, that was a fun one. Let's see how the scores shook out. Okay. So the Greenskin player had a very competitive army. He went super wide thanks to his auto-gen. He had enough leadership units to hold on to all these goblins and savage orcs to make sure that they continue fighting. His Doomdiver catapult, despite being shut down early, was able to get a lot of value, and he was also able to make these extremely cheap. Goblin Wolf Riders, I think, are 300 gold. Anytime you can get 50 kills on a unit that's 300 gold, you've done well. The Black Orcs held his center excellently. The Durkit Squigs tore down the Dark Elf player. I think it would have been a much more even fight had I not intervened. Using my Black Knights and my White King to tie down a whole group of cavalry, while using my Feasters to shut down the range, while using my Fellbats and my Vargeist to shut down 2 archers and an artillery piece, and then also using my Crypt Horrors and some of my Grave Guard and to tie down some of the tougher elements of the Greenskin front line was pretty key in us being able to overwhelm the Dark Elf player. Not the Dark Elf player, I'm sorry, the Greenskin player. And that's a very useful strategy in 2v2s. Overwhelming one position, and then at the end turning to face the other. You don't have to beat 2 players at once. If you can really crush one player with overwhelming forces, while I used maybe half of my army to distract the other. So the High Elf player was very well distracted by just a fraction of my forces, maybe half, and because of that we were able to greatly overwhelm the Greenskin player, who probably had the superior army and ultimately did his best. Let's take a look at the kills on the Dark Elf side. The Manticore did great work. The Hargonite Executioners were near perfect HP, as well as the Death Hag by the end of this fight. A lot of the supporting elements were very beaten up, but the infantry fight went so well for the Dark Elves. It was actually going pretty well for me also. I still had several Grave Guard units up. My Crypt Horrors were near perfect health. Heinrich Himmler, I still had some Winds of Magic on him, quite a bit actually. That Wind of Death at the end there was an extremely expensive spell that I didn't need to cast. If I was being more competitive, I would have probably had 2 groups of zombies instead of that spell, and I probably also would have been using more Raised Deads, Invocations of Nehek. And these 11 kills, I don't want you to think that's the full value of Heinrich Himmler. He certainly could have gotten more kills in that battle, but the full value comes when you take Krell. Krell, oftentimes, if he's supported correctly, will get 80, 90, 100 kills in an infantry blob, and in a 1v1 versus the Lord, he can sometimes just straight up beat most melee lords in the game. And you couple that with all of the Raised Deads, all the kills that can get, all the kills that you can get by getting more value out of your units through healing as an Invocations of Nehek, and his value starts to become more and more apparent. So, very fun game. Thanks to my ally, Commander Durpo, for being a great player. Thanks to Rullan and Scotland's Finest for being good sports and following the rules. I had a great time, and I think they did too. So thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, my name is Brett. My channel is Good Talk Gaming. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. That helps me out a lot. I've almost got 100 subscribers. I'm super close. I think I'm at 93 as of me recording this, and I would love to get to 100. That's kind of my short-term personal goal, and if y'all could help me out with that, I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care.